It's April 26, 1986. In the early hours of the morning, you wake up in the quiet town of Pripyat, just a few kilometers from the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant. Something feels wrong. The air is still, and as you glance out of the window, a strange light fills the night sky. It's coming from the direction of the plant, but you have no idea what's happening. In Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl plant, everything has just gone terribly wrong. A test that was supposed to simulate a power outage has spiraled out of control. Inside the control room, the engineers are fighting to regain control, but it's too late. A critical failure occurs, and in the blink of an eye, the unthinkable happens. Hours before the explosion, the engineers at Chernobyl were preparing to run a routine safety test. It was supposed to simulate what would happen if the plant lost power. The idea was to see if, in the event of an emergency, the cooling systems could still function on backup generators to prevent the reactor from overheating. But there was a problem. The reactor was already unstable. Over the years, a combination of flawed design and human error had created dangerous conditions inside Reactor 4. The operators in the control room didn't fully understand just how close they were to disaster. Inside the reactor, uranium fuel rods were undergoing a process called nuclear fission, releasing heat that turned water into steam. The steam powered turbines that generated electricity. It was a delicate balance, controlled by inserting graphite-tipped control rods into the reactor to absorb neutrons and regulate the reaction. But as the test began, things started to go wrong. First, the reactor's power dropped to dangerously low levels, far below what was safe. The operators tried to bring it back up by withdrawing all of the control rods. This was a critical mistake. The reactor was now in a highly unstable state, but the test continued. As the test proceeded, the reactor's power spiked suddenly, far higher than anyone expected. The engineers hit the emergency shutdown button, known as the AZ-5. The control rods, tipped with graphite, were supposed to slide back into the reactor to shut it down. But instead of cooling the reaction, the graphite tips caused a spike in reactivity at the bottom of the core. In just a few seconds, the reactor was spiraling out of control. Pressure built up inside the reactor. The water supposed to cool the system turned to steam, superheated steam that had no place to go. The fuel rods began to melt. The engineers in the control room could only watch in horror as the reactor's core reached critical levels. Then it happened. A massive blast rips through Reactor 4, sending a plume of radioactive material into the sky. The force of the explosion is so great, it tears the roof off the building, and a fireball erupts into the air. The once mighty reactor is now a burning wreck. But in the moments after the blast, most people don't yet understand what's happening. Within minutes, firefighters from Pripyat are dispatched to the scene. They see the flames and rush in to do what they've always done, put out the fire. But what they don't know is that they're running straight into a radioactive nightmare. No one tells them about the radiation. No one knows just how deadly it is. By the time they realize something is wrong, it's too late. The first responders have no idea they're facing an enemy they can't see or fight. The fire isn't just a normal fire, it's radioactive, sending lethal doses of radiation into the air. As the brave men battle the flames, their bodies begin to absorb the radiation. Some will collapse within hours. Others will suffer unimaginable pain in the days that follow. The invisible poison is already inside them. But as the flames are fought on the surface, a much more dangerous threat is looming underground, the reactor core itself. The reactor's core has turned into a molten mess, a radioactive lava that's slowly melting through the floor. If it reaches the water tanks below, the resulting steam explosion could be catastrophic, releasing even more deadly radiation into the atmosphere. But as this nightmare unfolds inside the plant, life in Pripyat continues, oblivious to the disaster brewing just a few kilometers away. In the nearby city of Pripyat, home to thousands of workers from the Chernobyl plant, no alarms are raised, no sirens, no evacuation orders. The people go about their lives, unaware that they are living in the shadow of the worst nuclear disaster in history. Some residents begin to notice strange things: the eerie glow in the sky, the taste of metal in the air, the smell of something burning. But still, no one knows what has happened. Life goes on, as if nothing is wrong. As the sun rises on Pripyat, the people continue with their daily routines. They don't know it yet, but every breath they take is contaminated with radioactive particles. It will be hours before anyone tells them to leave. At the Chernobyl plant, things are spiraling out of control. The radioactive cloud is spreading, drifting not just over Pripyat, but toward Europe. The Soviet authorities are scrambling, unsure of how to contain the disaster. The plant operators finally realize the full extent of the disaster, but it's too late. The explosion has already blown radioactive material high into the atmosphere. The Soviet government is notified, but even then, the true scale of the disaster is downplayed. No one wants to admit how bad things really are. In the Soviet Union, the government is in damage control mode. Admitting the scale of the disaster would be a blow to their reputation. So they try to contain the information, hoping the world won't find out what's happened at Chernobyl. But the truth is too big to hide. As radioactive material continues to escape, desperate measures are taken. Helicopters fly over the burning reactor, dumping tons of sand and boron in an attempt to smother the fire. But for many of the pilots, this mission is a death sentence. They're flying directly into a radioactive storm. Even as these efforts begin, the radiation continues to spread, carried by the wind. Pripyat, and soon much of Europe, is being exposed. It isn't until 36 hours after the explosion that the people of Pripyat are finally told to evacuate. Loudspeakers announce that the evacuation is only temporary, and residents are told to pack only what they need for a few days. Many leave their belongings behind, thinking they'll return. They never do. The streets of Pripyat are emptied, one busload at a time. People leave behind their homes, their possessions, their memories. They don't know it yet, but they will never return. Pripyat becomes a ghost town, abandoned forever to the creeping silence of radiation.